This meeting.
בוקר טוב, שבוע טוב. We begin our third session, and last, Be'ezrat Hashem, about Rabbi Soloveitchik, in which we try to cover his activity as Rosh Yeshiva in what was Yeshiva College when he entered, but became Yeshiva University a few years later, and some of his important decisions and leading a role he took as the leader, the spiritual leader of what is usually called modern Orthodoxy. I think I already mentioned he didn't like the name. Sometimes spoke about centrist Orthodoxy, but be it as it may, the YU stream in the United States and in North America. So, in 1941, in the middle of the Second World War, of Moshe Soloveitchik, the father, the esteemed father of Yosef Soloveitchik, who, as we remember, was basically his sole teacher, was niftar. He passed away 1941, and Rabbi Soloveitchik had replaced him as the Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshivat Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan in New York. Now, he didn't leave Boston. He remained living in Boston with his wife and children, but also taught in the yeshiva, which meant that I think he took the train in the first few years, and later he was taking a flight every week. And for 3 days or 2 days, he was in New York, and the rest of the week he was in Boston. And I heard from many people that knew him that sometimes it was like meeting almost two different persons, because in New York he was Rosh Yeshiva, and people feared him. There was a great ira for Soloveitchik there. It was very difficult to speak with him, and he went into this role. In Boston, he was a community rabbi, and he was much more approachable. I don't think he ever was, he was not a heavy man in that type of the sense. He was a great man. However, he was much more approachable in Boston than in New York. I heard it from few people that knew him from both places, which is, I think it's very interesting. In Rabbi Soloveitchik, I think, even if we look in a more broad perspective, he was as many a great man, but very also, it was very reflective, I think, of his greatness, that he was many things for many people. And that's why you can see, years after his passing, that many people that completely identify as his students, and they took very different roads, because as a great man, he was able to contain them all and educate them all and put everyone the path that belonged to him. But every one of them later felt that he is holding the lead of Soloveitchik. Because he heard from him that you need to have X and you must not have Y. While in truth, it's very clear after you read a few of these accounts that Rabbi Soloveitchik gave different answers to different people. That's not because Halakha is different from one to the other, but because the situation is different. So the ruling is different. Halakha, you can say, or the decision is when the rubber meets the road. So you need to understand the ideal, the idea, right, which is the halakha in its purity, and then you have to understand the real world unto which you are applying this ideal halakha. So it's the marriage of ideal and reality, and because reality differentiates from one occasion to the other and from one person to the other, he sometimes gave different answers to the same question, because it is not really the same question. Circumstances change. I heard one of his talmidim, one of his students, Rav Aaron Adler, was also his personal driver at certain times. And I heard him speaking about Rav Soloveitchik. He also published a book from his, I think there are 70 dialogues that he had with the Rav while he was the driver and the Rav was sitting in the car. So he was interviewing the Rav, and years later he published that as a book. Now, again, I don't know. The mind plays tricks on us, so I wouldn't say that you should rely. I don't know Rav Adler. I'm sure that he's a Talmid Chacham and he's a good man. However, I'm very careful with this type of things that people write years after they happened and try to reconstruct from their memory whole dialogues. But put this carefulness aside, Rav Adler says that he asked him why didn't Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote Halakha responsa as Rabbi Yosef? Remember, they were relatives. So why didn't Rabbi Soloveitchik? Because Rabbi Soloveitchik was also giving Halakhic answers all the time. Why doesn't he write some Halakhic responsa? And Rabbi Soloveitchik told him that it's a tradition in the Soloveitchik family, beginning already with Reb Chaim, that you never publish in your lifetime. Why? Because maybe you'd have, not maybe, for sure you should aspire to understand better. So you only know that you reached your peak are dead. So basically only so to be your children that you'd print your Torah. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, his children printed his Chidush Reb Chaim ala Torah. So that's why he was not, he had qualifications on printing Divrei Torah in general. And specifically regarding Halakha, he thought that Halakha should remain Torah Shebal Peh, oral Torah, because it should retain this flexibility when occasions change, when circumstances change, that you can reapply the Halakha according to the specific situation. That's how he quote Rav Soloveitchik. Okay, so that's just regarding his different roles as Rosh Yeshiva. But as I said today, B'ezrat Hashem would focus more on his role as a Rosh Yeshiva. I read in a few places, I do not know if it's scientifically researched, but they say he is the Rav that ordained the greatest number of rabbis in all times. With, of course, via university, because every year they would have a few hundreds of Muslimachim. So that became a very, very number of the 40 years, more than 40 years that he was Rosh Yeshiva. So you can do the numbers. It's a very big number of ordained rabbis that he was signed on their Teuda. Now, that's in itself, I'm not sure what to say about that. So on one hand, I think it's a great thing. He was a rabbi of rabbis, obviously, and he almost single-handedly changed the landscape of modern Orthodoxy in North America, because all the rabbis basically were his own students, and all looking up to him for the decisions. On the other hand, sometimes you cannot but admit that quantity comes on the account of quality. And so when you ordain so many, not all of them would be you cannot ordain all of these rabbis. All of them would be the sharpest pencil, right? In the box, yeah. So you have to admit that. So some of them may be less, and I think you would be the first one to admit that as well. That not all of them were necessarily the most successful ones. But however, again, he saw it as extremely important in order to reconstruct, or not to construct the Jewish life, traditional Jewish life in North America. A very important goal he had is to bring the world of the traditional learning of Torah, study of Torah from Europe into this new world of North America. And that was not a simple thing. For example, something that for us may look simple, but it was a big change. In 1960, it changed the language in Yeshiva University, the language they taught Torah, from Yiddish to English. Now again, for us that may seem years after as a simple thing. It was not a simple thing at all, because you have to remember, he received all of his Torah from his father in Yiddish. For him, it was extremely important, because he would quote verbatim his father, and he would use the exact terms that his father used. And now we have to translate everything. Now the translation, as we can all understand, it's not just a translation of language. It's a translation of culture. You cannot take an American boy, right, in the age of 20 in 1960, and imagine that teaching him is like teaching a Jewish European, right, Lithuanian boy in 1940. It's completely different culture. They don't speak the same language. Literally, they don't speak the same language. But more important, culturally, they do not speak the same language. When we speak about Europe, then we speak about a community that was autonomous, that was more or less enclosed, much less intertwined with the non-Jewish culture, and much more informed and based in Jewish tradition. When you speak about the typical American boy, and again, we have here people that I hope that would accept or agree with what I say, but when you speak about the typical American boy that was 20 years old in 1960, then these are not the way that you would classify him. Meaning he was much more intertwined with the non-Jewish world, not only in business, in culture, in sports, things that in Lithuania were not even on the table. So much more, as I say, cultured with the surrounding, and he was many times. If we take out things, people that were really exceptionals, most of them were much less informed in Jewish studies. The Hebrew skills were much lesser, and their basic knowledge was much lesser. Again, if you remember when we spoke about Rav Meir Shapira of Lublin, so in order to be admitted into Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin, then a 16 years old child had to know two Sedarim and two Masechtot two Sedarim of Mishnah and three Masechtot of Gemara, and knew them almost by heart and take a test. The American typical boy of 20 years old in 1960, if he can read Rashi and more or less understand what he reads, then that would be very good. Dream about testing them about two Masechtot and being able to answer that, it was not the reality. So you begin from a very different starting point. On the other hand, they may be much more sophisticated than the boy in Eastern Europe. So that's different landscape, it's different culture, it's different air, it's different atmosphere, and Rav Soloveitchik was determined to be able, he was sure, he said that the Rambam, as you all know, wrote 13 principles of faith. Rav Soloveitchik says there is a 14th one, and that is that the Torah must be applicable to every place and every time. You shall not say that the Torah is irrelevant. So he was adamant that he would be able, and he must, and that's his commitment as a mechanic, as an educator, to take the Torah that was developed in Europe, and of course specifically his own stern, which is Brisk, right, this lamdanut, and copy, paste it into the American soil. Now, as you know, in copy-paste, there are two types, right? If you use a modern analogy. So when you copy-paste in Word, right, you have two ways to copy-paste. There is one way in which you completely preserve the style and the font from the document you are copying from. That may work with the new document you are copying into. The other way, which is much more complicated, is to keep the text, but adapt the new style. And then the computer tries to take your old text, but give it the new style as in the new document. That can lead to a lot of problems, as you understand, but that also creates, in the new document, some type of a continuity. Now the new document is whole. And that is exactly this cut and wisely paste is the way that Rav Soloveitchik saw his role. Has a beautiful, now he describes that in plenty of places. He was not, as I said, he had qualifications about printing Torah. he printed more, that's very interesting, he printed much more philosophy than Historia. And students wrote later Historia, and we have many things that were written by students. But basically, he wrote much more of his philosophy in formal publications, and that caused some type of discrepancy, a problem of proportions, because people that study, many of the people that study Rav Soloveitchik, so what is the material they use? The material they use is the material that he published, but he published much more on philosophy than on his Torah. However, in his life, it is very clear the balance was that almost everything was Torah and much less was philosophy. So that creates some imbalance in the way that many times his figures being reflected through his texts. However, so in many of his published texts, he does explain how he sees Torah learning and the importance of Torah learning and how we need always to be in eternal dialogue with the earlier generations. And that is what Torah is about. However, I had found that, for me at least, the most moving piece in which he describes that was not something that he wrote, but something that he said. In Pidyon Haben, there was an event of Pidyon Haben, redeeming the firstborn, and that was much later than the years that we speak about. That was in 1974. 1970, so he was 71 years old, and he was, so at that point, he was much older than his students, as you can understand. And he was speaking in a Pidyon Haben he was a rabbi of the son father. He was the rabbi of his son grandfather. And when the grandfather enrolled as a young man into YU, then the grandfather wrote a letter to the Rav asking him to put his eye on his grandchild that now enters the yeshiva. So that was in the 1940s. So Rav Soloveitchik spoke about how special it is that he has now 5 generations connection with this family. And that he himself said at the beginning of the speech that he gave, that put him into a nostalgic mood. And from this mood, he said the following, which I think is, I don't know, it's one of the most amazing pieces I think I ever read. And you can also hear that, it's in YU site, it is available, you can hear the Rav's voice. It's the recording quality is not great, as you can imagine, but it's amazing. So that's a verbal transcription of the Rav's speech in that Pidyon Haben. So it's as it's transcribed from a real life delivered speech. As you can understand, it's not completely how do you say fluent, but it is raw. Which sometimes is much better. So look at source Aleph. So it's a speech from Pidyon Haben, 1974. It says, whenever I enter the classroom, which is crowded with boys, could be, as far as age is concerned, my grandchildren. So he's 74, and he's 71, and he's entering the classroom. In the classroom, the children are 18. Yeah, that is completely possible. He said they could have been grandchildren. They entered the classroom as an old man. I am old with wrinkled face and eyes, reflecting fatigue and the sadness of old age. You have to be old in order to experience that sadness. It is very strange sadness. It's the melancholy of remembering things which disappear, they don't exist. And obviously he speaks here about the old world, about Europe, about the state that he grew in, about his father. That was a generation, I not have to tell you, but that was a generation that was a bridge between the old and the new. Here in Eretz Israel, after 2 or 3 generations, the gap between grandfathers and grandchildren is it's a little smaller. Because if my grandmother was born in Hungary, in Transylvania, and she was in Auschwitz. The gap between her and me, as I loved her, ahavat nefesh, so love. However, there was a big gap. I grew here in Israel, and my mother was already born in Israel. So I see myself as Israeli. and Tzava, right? And I never knew anything else. And I was born after the 6 Days War and after Melchemet Yom Kippur. And she was born in the Old World before Second World War. That's a big gap. It's a big gap. Love can bridge everything, but it's a big gap. And Rav Soloveitchik as well, of course, he also saw his role, as I said, to be the bridge between this old world that disappeared, that's the sadness that he's speaking about, and the new world. He says, out of the classroom, I sit down, and opposite me are rows of boys. And sometimes he had more than 100 boys in his classroom. Young boys with big eyes, faces, clear eyes, radiating the joy of being young. So he's obviously contrasting here himself with his eye, the melancholy, the sadness, and the beaming young boys. You know, I am a very pessimistic mood. That's amazing. He says, when Soloveitchik says, when I enter the classroom, I'm pessimistic. I always enter the class in despair. And I ask myself, classroom, can there be a dialogue between an old teacher and young students? Between a rabbi in his Indian summer? That's amazing. English always is amazing, right? For someone that emigrates so late, Indian summer. I had to go to the dictionary in order to understand what an Indian summer is. Here in Israel, we have an Israeli summer. That's only a summer. But in North America, we call Indian summer when the summer is late. It's prolonged. Yeah, exactly. So he says, I am already in the summer of my life, meaning in the end of the year. That's like the summer is in the end of the year. And my end is prolonged now. But you know, babies enjoying the spring of their life. So how can the summer and the spring have a dialogue? How they can interact? I start the shiur. I don't know what the conclusion will be. He doesn't speak about the conclusion of the shiur of what he's teaching. But about the conclusion of this question. Can there be a dialogue? Whenever I start the shiur, the door opens. The old man walks in and sits down. He is older than I am. Talmidim, excuse me. Yeah. He's older than the Rav. He is the grandfather of the Rav. His name is Rabbi Chaim Brisk, so he remembers his grandfather. He says, whenever I teach, I imagine my grandfather, which he knew very well, sits beside me. And without whom shiur can be delivered. He said, I cannot give the shiur if he doesn't sit next to me. Then the door opens quietly again, and another old man comes in. He's older than Reb Chaim. He's in the 17th century. What is his name? Shabsai Cohen, the famous Shach, who must be present when dinim mabanot, right, monetary issues are being discussed. When we study Bava Metzia, Bava Kama, and then more visitors show up. Some of the visitors lived in the 11th century, some in the 12th century, some in the 13th century, some lived in antiquity. Rabbi Akiva, Rashi, Rabbi Nutan, the Rav, the Rashba, come in. Do you remember the story he told as a young boy? So from age 7 or 3 to age 70, it's the same experience. I think that's amazing. Of course, what do? Introduce them to my pupils. The dialogue commences. The Rambam says something, the Ravid disagrees. Sometimes he, meaning the Ravid, is very nasty, very sharp, harsh language he uses against the Rambam. A boy jumps up to defend the Rambam against the Ravid, and the boy is fresh. Oh, young boys are fresh, so the language he uses is improper. He uses improper language. So I correct him. Another jumps up with an idea. The Rashba smiles gently. I try to analyze what the young boy meant. And another intervenes. We call upon the Rabbi Nutan to express his opinion, and suddenly a symposium of generations comes into existence. That's what Limud Torah is. A symposium of generations. When it is at speak, of course, when you have a master teacher such as Rabbi Soloveitchik. We all speak one language. Regardless, some of the rabbis spoke Arabic, some Aramaic, some Hebrew, some Yiddish, and now he teaches in English. But they all speak one language. Vatehi kol haaretz safa atat udvarim achadim. That's before the bubble, right? That everyone spoke the same language. We all chat, we all laugh, we all enjoy the company, and we all pursue one goal. We all committed to a common vision. We operate in the same categories. That's very important for him, right? That's then he thinks that everyone always learns in the Brisker way, meaning classifying in categories. Everything is analyzed. We all committed to the same categories. The unity of generations, this march of centuries, this conversation of generations, this dialogue between antiquity and present will finally bring the redemption of the Jew. We belong to the same Mesorah community where generations meet, where hands and parchment dry, one hand is, and how soft and one the other hand is. Shake, unite, and in a community where the great dialogue continues. When I was looking at the baby who was redeemed this evening, now he returns to the event at hand, I don't know whatever he will be in my class. Right? He taught his father, he taught his grandfather. Now we know if the redeeming was, if Pidyon Ben was in 1974, then the boy would only be 18 in 1992. The Rav stopped teaching in 1986 because of the Alzheimer and the Parkinson that he had. So we know that he was not Zoche. He didn't have the merit to teach the son, to teach this grandchild. However, he says, whenever I live to have him, but someone will sit and teach this baby. And the baby is already a member of the community, of the great Mesorah community. And I feel as if it is possible to establish communication with this baby. So I think that's beautiful. Yeah. So that's, for me, that's clearer than any of these very analytical expositions that he gave in the other film. I greatly, of course, recommend reading everything that he wrote. However, that is so moving, so clear. I think that really you can feel what he's speaking about. Okay. So that's what you saw, the importance of what you saw as the Rebbe, the Rav, of YU. Now, obviously, why that is extremely, excuse me for a second. I think I hear myself. I don't know how to make everyone silent. Just a second. I apologize. Yeah, mute on. Yeah, okay. Excuse me. So, yes. 1944, still during the Holocaust, Rabbi Soloveitchik is publishing maybe his first extremely important piece, a masterpiece, which is Isha Halakha. Don't look at the title because it was not there yet. Isha Halakha. It went a few variations, but the basis was published in 1944. And in the motto of the book, he writes, באותה שעה נראתה לו, בעתה דיוקנו של אביו ונראתה לו בחלון. So he quotes from the Midrash about Yosef, of course, Yosef is his name, that when Eshet Potiphar tried to seduce him, he saw the image of his father in the window. So this Yosef, of Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, says, now that I'm in America with the seductions of the new world, but I can still see the image of my father, was Niftar 3 years earlier, in my window. And the book is called Isha Halakha, and that is basically the philosophy of Yahadut. Because for Rabbi Soloveitchik, the word Halakha more or less cover what Yahadut is. Rabbi Soloveitchik thought that you only stand on firm ground when you speak from the standpoint of Halakha. Now, Halakha doesn't necessarily mean the bottom line. Halakha means the discussions of Halakha. Some of them were asked, some of them maybe were rejected. But as long as you speak Halakha, you're on firm ground. When you speak what we call Machshava, this is extremely theoretical. So one day you would say X, and the others they would say Y, and the words are cheap. However, when you speak halakha, you are committed. That's science. Halakha is like science. It was very important for him. He said that there are two, the book is from a philosophical type point of view, and here I'm speaking about things that are, the whole thing is beyond my comprehension. The philosophy of it is even more beyond my comprehension, but I'm sitting here, so I have to explain. So I'll do my best, and you'd read more if you want to understand. So this book is coming from an angle in philosophy called phenomenology. Now, that means that you are trying to understand the phenomena on its own ground. You do not do reduction. You can go to, let's say, religion. And I say, you know what really religion is? It's a whole, it's a face. But beneath it, the real mechanism is psychology. People want a big father to defend them, like Freud. People would want a big father to defend them. So they made up God to be their great father in heaven. Or I can be Marx. I say, you know what? Really, religion is a superstructure. Behind it is the aspiration for power. Because the rabbis wants to control the masses, so they use religion in order to control them, etc., etc., etc. Of course, I can also go the other way. I can say, you know why people are heading themselves on communism or on money? Because really what they want is the Yetzer Hara. So it goes both direction. Phenomenology says you should investigate a phenomenon in its own grounds. Do not do reduction to a different field. So if you now investigate religion, you should work according to the categories of religion. Don't do psychologization, don't do socialization, don't do historization. Speak about the phenomenon in its own terms. So that's what he does here. He says, when we speak from a phenomenological point of view, we can say that there are two types. Now, here we need another term, a philosophical term in order to understand Rabbi Soloveitchik, extremely important, and that's called dialectics. So, very, very rough. What is dialectics? Dialectics is when you have one term, one concept, and you have the anti-concept, meaning something that is opposite, and from them you either do, so you jump from one to the other, you make some synthesis, and you come up with a third term that is, it's a mix of both of them. That's, again, very, very, very rough. So Rabbi Soloveitchik was extremely dialectical in almost everything that he wrote, either in Torah or lehavdil in philosophy. So he says, we can speak about two concepts. There is the man of science, ish hadat, and there is the man of religion, the man of homo religious. And he said, ish halakha is neither one. Let's read the second source here, how he portrays ish halakha. Halachic man, you see source bet? Halachic man differs both from homo religiouses, who rebels against the rule of reality and seeks a refuge in a supernatural, I think it should be, in a supernatural world. And he also, so halachic man is different from that one. So this religious man who lives in a cave, right, in a desert, and he doesn't want this world. He only wants the world to come. He only wants spirituality. That's the homo religious. But halachic man also is different than from cognitive man, the man of science, who does not encounter any transcendence at all. Right? The man of science knows only of things that you can measure. However, halachic man apprehends transcendence, meaning he is looking for spirituality. However, instead of rising up to it, as does the man of religion, he tries to bring it down to him. Rather than raising the lower realms to the higher world, halachic man brings down the higher realms to the lower world. That is, I think, if we can try to make the sense of his philosophy. Of course, here again, you need to read the book. But if I'm trying, I hope that I'm not completely right, that I obviously I'm grossly oversimplifying. I think that's simple, that's clear. But I hope that I'm not completely off the mark. So here he says, what is Yahadut all about? What is Halakha all about? Taking the transcendent ideas and giving them physical bodies. So we have this transcendent idea about the of Mesorah and how can you speak with earlier generations. As an idea, it's a beautiful idea. The question is, can you make anything real out of it? If there is Allah, there is a real object to this idea. So how do you create this community of Mesorah, community of generations? By the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is very objectified measures. How much do you have to learn? On what days do you have to learn? These are halakhic questions. Sometimes we are dismissive, right, of this type of. We say, you know, God wants the heart. Why do you need all of these details? Also, it says, no, that's the whole point. To take these high ideals and give them scientific existence. The man of science knows that nothing can exist without mass, right? Without a specific form, without a specific material. If you want the ideas to exist in our world, if you want to take the higher realms and lower them into our world, you must give them body. Now, bodies are specific. Even I would say, I don't know, maybe he won't say that, but bodies also have weaknesses. And they cover one thing, then don't cover the other. You know, when I plan this shiur, so I have an idea of what I want to give. The idea is perfect, at least to my ability to be perfect. And in my idea, when I envisioned this shiur, as a night I sat very late, and I was envisioning this shiur and writing myself the notes and how I would be able to cover everything and to speak about, and everything would be explained very short, very fast, very accurate. And you come and you try to give the body to this idea, and you know what it is. The body sometimes fail you. It happens. And but that is halakha. Otherwise, these are lofty ideas, which in the end, he says that in Isha Halakha, in a different place, he says, look at all of these lofty, Christianity is a religion about very high ideas. Love the other as you love yourself. But there is no halakha. They threw halakha away. Because one of the founders of Christianity said that the only way to get rid of sins is if you get rid of mitzvot. That's a doctrine. The mitzvah. If there are no mitzvot, there are no sins. Okay. So they said, no, we would have high ideas and we just apply them as we go. It said, look at the Holocaust. So where did all of these great ideas went? If you don't have a real body that says what you must do and what you should not do, then the high ideas in the head would not be able to find a place in the world. And when the situation would come and things would stand to the test, obviously some people were Hasidim Umot Olam, it does not deny it. But en masse, as a community, as a nation, high ideals cannot stand the test of time if they are not hence, if they are not put into very objective bodies. And that is what halakha does. The fundamental tendency of the halakha is to translate the quantitative features of religious subjectivity, the content of religious main conscience, which surges and swells like the waves of the sea, then pounds against the shores of reality. It's the
outside. It's a long time to get parking. And the lot, I mean, not in the building.
And established quantities, like names
that far.
That no storm can uproot from the place.
I just sat and waited for someone to come out.
Guys, again.
Yeah.
So white jumps all the time. So I think I hope that's clear. Again, he had everyone says he had a great gift of explaining things very, very clearly in his shiurim. Now, the writings are somewhat more complicated. I think even this short quote It's complicated and it's philosophical. That's one of his easier. It's not the easiest, but it's one of the easier books. Ish Halakha. There is one that they didn't even translate to Hebrew, which is called the Halakhic Mind, and because it's so philosophically, the terms are so difficult that they, as for now, years later, they still yet to translate. I guess they will do it somewhere, but that's not being done as for now. Okay, so that's again, if we can somehow try in a few sentences to give the essence of why Talmud Torah is so important. So it's the creation of this Masorah community, but it is also Talmud Torah is the way to speak the great ideas, but to speak them in concrete terms. When you learn about the ox that grows the cow, that seems to be a very specific. No, that's the only way. We can speak about justice and go to protest all that you want. In the real world, justice is served to the ox that grows the cow. Only if you learn that, if you are able to monetize these high ideas into the smallest of coins, only then it has real roots in reality. That's how we saw it. That's why Talmud Torah is so important for the project of bringing the high realms into this world. In 1946, he became the president of Tnuat HaMizrahi. I think we spoke about that. The 1947, the Nasi HaKavod of Mizrahi in the United States. I think I already spoke about his role in the Mizrahi, so I'll continue. In 1953, he becomes the most important, the prominent authority, halakhic authority in the RCA. That is the Rabbinical Council of America. That is the most rabbinical organization. The Haredi have the Agudat HaRabbanim, and the modern Orthodox have the RCA. Through his position in the RCA, he more or less, again, almost single-handedly shaped the halakhic most important positions of the modern Orthodoxy. That includes the fierce opposition to conservative and reform. He gave a psak that if you are stuck in a place on Rosh Hashanah and you don't have a shofar to blow, the only shofar blowing is in a conservative shul where the sitting is mixed, then you are better skipping hearing the shofar than going to such a shul. Now, obviously, that's part of it. It's contextual. It's part of the war against the conservative movement, against what was then the shift to the left. We are in a different place now. But then there was a great shift, the great leaning towards the left, you may say, and many Orthodox shuls were beginning to give up and make sittings, and he saw that as a complete breach of tradition and fought against it fiercely, as you can see in that psak. By the way, when he wanted to explain why it's so important that people would sit and that the genders would not be mixed in shul. So it's tradition, it's Masorah, it's Halakha. But he also gave a very interesting explanation. He gave it as an expert opinion to a court when there was some sentence regarding one shul that some members wanted it to be separated, others wanted to make it mixed, and there was a question of constitution of the shul. You can imagine, I think, the basic guidelines of the case. And he was asked to give his expert opinion if the shul constitution say that the shul is orthodox. Does that necessarily mean that the sitting must be separated? Now again, for us it's simple. That was a hidden question. And he wrote the United States tort. He wrote a tshuva explaining that in Yahadut we believe that a person stands, when he stands in front of God, there is no priest, there is no relative. That we stand in Tfilat Shmona Esrei, it's a Tfilah Belachash, it's you and Hashem. So that's why we don't want you to sit next to your spouse. You sit or you stand with yourself, with God. You don't stand up as a family. You stand as yourself. Later, of course, you daven for your family. Everything is correct. But the most basic feature of Shmona Esrei is like Hannah, right? The mother of Shmuel in the beginning of Sefer Shmuel, going to the Mishkan And from there we learned that Tfilat Shmona Esrei, and stands herself, the Elkanah doesn't go with her, no one comes with her, she and God. That is the basis of the Shmona. So that's how he explained this ruling of separated sitting. 1954, although he was, as I said, in fierce opposition to conservative and reform, as always, there are people on your left, but there are also people on your right. And the Rabbanim from the Rabbanim wanted to create a ban against sitting in the same council. There was a council of the shuls, of the synagogues of America, in which there were members both the Reform and Conservative and Orthodox. And very prominent poskim, among them those that we learned about, of Kotler, of Feinstein, wanted to ban sitting with the Conservative and the Orthodox in this council. Rabbi Soloveitchik thought...
Oh.
Pardon?
Conservative and Reform.
Conservative, yes, excuse me. Yeah, and also, yeah, also all the three options were sitting together. So they wanted to be also that. Rabbi Soloveitchik didn't want to sign the Herem, and they had to go without him. That caused the rift, because so the more Haredi got out of this council, but the modern Orthodox remained, and that was like the marker. Are you more right wing, or are you? That's before the time of the black hats in America. So everyone had black hats. So before it was the marker. So the marker was: are you sitting in this rabbinical council or not? In the synagogue council of the SCA, Synagogue Council of America. He later published that he said there is this two type of covenants that Am Israel is sharing. One covenant is the shared fate, and the other is the shared destiny. And he said, of course, we want to have all of these two covenants. However, sometimes some of our brothers, they lose their way, and we do not share a shared destiny with them because they see their destiny. We have the destiny in Sinai. But even if they lost the destiny of Sinai, we are still bound together by the covenant of Egypt, because we are all enslaved. We are all enslaved in Egypt. And as we would say today, in the Holocaust, right, they didn't differentiate between a neolog and an Orthodox and a Fry and whatever you have been. If you had the Jewish nose, then you are part of the same nation. And this, so Rabbi Soloveitchik says, while we may differ on question of destiny, as long as we are bound, we will be bound by the covenant of fate, we must act together. Now again, act together doesn't mean that we would not give up on what we believe is the destiny. So our commitment to Halakha would not change. As I said, and he would oppose even going in order to hear a shofar to a conservative shul. But working together against anti-Semitism, that's something that is part of Jewish faith. So that is something that we must do together and not separate ourselves. He later developed an interesting parallel to that regarding the question of relation to Christianity. As you know, in the early 60s, the Pope had published a letter in which he changed the formal policy of the church, of the Catholic Church, vis-a-vis Jews. And he said, we exempt, thank you, we exempt them from the time of their side, right? Murdering of the God, because their God can be murdered, and of course we were to be blamed. So he said they are exempt from that. And we look on Judaism as our big brothers. There is a fraternity, of religions, and many people are very excited about that. That's a change of policy of thousands of years. Rabbi Soloveitchik was much more. Yes, he was not so excited, and he said, "We do not need the acknowledge of anyone." And religion is every community religion is an orbit to itself. We do not need to reflect ourselves. We have no brothers in religion, he said. Meaning, if you want to see us as your big brothers, that's your thing, but we do not see you as our, we didn't write it in so strong words, but we do not see you as our small brothers. We have no brothers, and no, our father is Hashem, and that's it. And he said, we are not interested in engaging in interfaith dialogue, because that's also part of what the church wanted to do. It says, let's now sit down and discuss together. Now that we are brothers, we can. He said, no, thank you. לא מדובשך ולא מעוקצך. Meaning, do not give us your honey, do not give us your sting. We had enough. Just let us stay put and leave us alone. But he said, what I am able to work with is about common humanitarian issues. Because again, in some reflecting what he said about the Jewish people, of course, in different words, in different realms, he said, as long as you speak about things that are about me as human being, about helping, I don't know, people in Darfur. So that's something that we can share. Why? Because that's part of our shared human fate. But in the minute you're going up to questions of religion, there, as Avram said to his servants when he was going with Yitzchak to the mountain, Atem shvu lachem po im hachamor, you sit here with the donkey, and me and my boy would go up to the mountain and serve Hashem and go get back later to you. So that was again a very important fundamental piece that he wrote that shaped the way that modern Orthodoxy, at least for obviously, you know, in Yahadut, everyone goes to his own tune, as you all know. We have no church and no hierarchy, and people are different rabbis do whatever they want. That's the bottom line. But at least the formal line, the party line of the RCA was that there is no interfaith dialogue with other religions, and but we do cooperate in humanitarian issues. In 1960. In 1959, he gave some lectures, and then they were published in 1965 as again one of the most important, most accessible writings, I would say. That is Ish HaEmunah HaBoded, the lonely man of faith. That is coming less from a phenomenological point of view and more from existential point of view. So again, philosophy has different streams, and existential means what is my existence? And Ish HaEmunah HaBoded, it's interesting, here they translate it as Ish HaEmunah, man of faith. However, in English, it's called the lonely man of faith. And that is one of the most important lessons of this mass, of this writing, and that is that every person in the end, Adam was created alone. Now, we should differentiate. There is alone and there is lonely. Alone means that there are no people here. Alone is, Baruch Hashem, there are many people here. So we are not alone. But still, in a very deep sense, each one of us is lonely. Because there is a limit to how much can we express ourselves, how much can we connect ourselves. And that makes each one of us very, very lonely. You can only redeem yourself through God, but you can only redeem yourself through God by the creating of first a family and then a community of believers. That's again very, I'm oversimplifying grossly, but that's basically what he was trying to say in that book. There you can find his very well known and cherished interpretation on the differences between the first chapter of Bereshit and the second chapter of Bereshit, the two types of men that are described. And again, you would have to read it inside. It's a beautiful, beautiful writing, and also much more, as I said, much less philosophical and much more existential, much more accessible than his Isha Halakha, and of course from his halachic mind. In 1959, Rabbi Yitzchak Herzog passes away, and Rabbi Soloveitchik is being summoned, is being asked to come and serve as the chief rabbi of Israel. I'm making a long story very, very, very short. He refuses, and the reason is, so he says, because the rabbinate in Israel is too politicized. The Rav Rashi is not independent enough. I want to be independent. I don't want to be in a place where politicians will dictate to me what I should say. So he didn't come. Again, one can wonder how things would have turned if he would have come and served as the Rav Rashi. I continue. In 1967 was, of course, a great year for the Jewish nation. However, for Rabbi Soloveitchik, it was an extremely difficult year because in the same year, his mother, his brother, and his wife all died. In that year, it was an extremely hard blow for him. In the same year, in 1967, after the 6 Days War, there was a certain mechanechet, a teacher here in Israel, that wrote to him asking, because she was teaching his teachings in her classroom, and the students asked, so if Rav Soloveitchik is so Zionist, why doesn't he make Aliyah? And she wrote to him asking why. I mean, that's what the student asked, so I would, of course, she apologized for this personal question, but she said the students wants to know if you can give an answer. And he answered here, you can see it in source Gimel in your page. Let's read it quickly. I know that I'm already over time. Excuse me. כבוד ים שלו שתחיה שלום וברכה. אני מבקש סליחה על אשר לא נזדקקתי לגרתה בדחיפה ואיחרתי עד כה, so I apologize for not writing sooner. קשה הייתה עליי וגם עדיין קשה היא הכתיבה. It's very difficult for me to write. שקוע אינני באבלות על מות רעייתי החביבה. I am completely immersed in mourning for my wife, beloved wife, בבת עיני. I don't know how to translate it to English. So בבת עיני, the people of my eye. חמדת נפשי, the glory of my soul. זיכרונה לברכה. התמוטט וחרב, my world had collapsed and is destroyed. גם עכשיו אני כותב בדם, even now I write in tears, ובדם ליבי, and with the blood of my heart, הקרוע ומותח, which was torn and it's boiling. אני מודה לדברים ואני מקבל את תוכחתם ברצון. Thank you for your words and I accept your תוכיח, I accept your rebuke about me not making עלייה. נתתי לארץ הקודש, I sinned against the holy land, הנני בין המפגרים, I am among those that are late in coming. מובן שהרבה גורמים בלתי תלויים בעקבוי, so many things I could not control, אבל אני מבקש אנטר, I not look for an excuse, אין לי מלמד סנגוריה על עצמי, אשמתי והקולר תלוי בצווארי, so everything depends on my, he says on my neck. He says, last year we decided, me and my wife, זיכרונה לברכה, לבוא ארצה ולעשות, so that's interesting, so in 1966, me and my wife decided that we would come to ארץ ישראל for 6 months, כדי לראות את הארץ ואת העם היושב בה, so we sit for 6 months in ארץ ישראל. שבות בלבדה, מרם השארה, but now she passed away. וליבי עליי דווי, הרבה ממטרה יושבים בין בארץ ובין בגולה מאיצים שעבור עכשיו, so many of my friends still push me to come and make עלייה, גם גבירתי הרגישה מכתבה כשעת רצון, שהיא גם שעת משבר רוחני. He says, our teachers taught us that if you are sad, you cannot sit in Yerushalayim. And he says, right now, I am in a complete avelut, and it's unallowed for me, he says, to come to Eretz Israel. And he says, I sit in New York, and I teach there many students. So in the end, he also gives another reason. I give them I have many students there, and you are a teacher in Eretz Israel. He says you have your own classroom, and he says there is no. If you teach, it doesn't matter if you teach to a lot or teach to a few. But that's what I do. I sit in New York. I teach many students, and as for now, that's what I should continue to do. Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, his son, Professor Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, he tells that he once entered his father's shiur after 1967, and he says that he was amazed from the change that his father undergone. Because before that, he says, he was like a lion in a cage. When he was giving a shiur, he was like a panther waiting to jump on you. But but he says after 67, after the death of his mother, brother, and wife in the same year, he said he was not the same person. He was much more content. He was much more nicer to his students. And he says that his father believed, before this year, he believed that the power of will had no limits. It can be done if you just will it enough. So when he saw his students sometimes not knowing or unprepared, he said that's laziness. But after he saw that he couldn't save his wife, then in a way, suddenly he understood the limits of the human being. And that's how he explains it. And that's why he became softer to his students. As I said, he had in 1985 he had to remove himself from giving the shiur because of Parkinson and the Alzheimer and dementia that was unfortunately was devouring him. In a interview he gave in 1977, he said that he feels that he was successful in transferring Torah to his students in the United States. However, he said, was unsuccessful in delivering them the experience I had. He said, Torah, yes. Information, yes. Knowledge, yes. But the emotional experience that I grew up with, he said, I feel that I was not successful in delivering to my American students. I think it's very interesting, very humbling. That's how we saw it. After a few years of sickness, he was niftar in 1993 in Yudchet Benisan. Now that's in itself, if you would excuse me for 2 more minutes, because even this story is very typical. So I said that's the mekubal in the world that he was niftar in Yudchet Benisan. The truth is that, as should be with such a person as Rabbi Soloveitchik, a dialectical man, he was niftar exactly in the Bein HaShmashot, between Yud Zayin B'Tevet and Yudchet B'Tevet. So his son keeps the Yortzeit in Yud Zayin, in Yud Zayin B'Nisan. However, the daughters, and so Rav Lichtenstein, and so what is usually printed in Eretz Israel, they keep the date in Yudchet. So the date written on the Matzeva is Yud Zayin because his son was responsible for the writing. So there is a machloket regarding the date of his ptira, because he was niftar in Bein HaShmashot, as should for such a person. Of course, his influence is immense. That it would require a shiur to itself to speak about all of the different influences. Just to give an example, that's a book that was published by my father-in-law that just from a few weeks ago, called The Philosophy of Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, Conciliatory Perspective, Reflections on His Late Thought. And that is just one very small example, excellent example, but one example. So Professor Schwartz, my father-in-law, he himself wrote 5 or 6 books about Rabbi Soloveitchik, and that's only one researcher, and that's many writes about his Torah is being taught, and the students that he ordained, the rabbis that he ordained, became the leading force in all of North America, and also in many places here in Eretz Israel. And we also, in many senses, are part of the wave that he created. Thank you.
So,